Hi, my name is Steven and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Life Lessons Learned, Part 1, a guide to my Asian childhood. So today I'm starting a new series about the lessons I've learned throughout my life. This series will cover different aspects of my life and the lessons I've learned along that journey. Now that I'm older, I want to take a look back and see where I could have done better in my life, and how I would have handled my circumstances differently had I known about those life lessons earlier. This is both a healing process for me and also a guide for others on how to tackle those life circumstances. So I'll start off looking at my childhood and how I would have done things differently had I been able to go back in time and tell my younger self what to do. My childhood definitely wasn't easy, and I had a lot of pain and trauma throughout that childhood that I'm still struggling to be okay with. There are a lot of things in my childhood that I wish I would have known about or done differently. And in that journey of healing that pain, I want to try to process it through this video and all the lessons that I've learned, and see if I could do better with the tools and knowledge that I have now looking back on my past. And I hope in some small way I can prevent future pain and suffering from those watching this video learning from my mistakes. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about my background, my lessons learned, and my thoughts on this. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell, share with your friends if you like this content. And here we go. So I'll start by talking about the past. It's a funny thing, no matter how long that time has been, if you recall something bad in your past, it feels like it happened yesterday. The stronger the childhood emotional memory, the more likely you're going to remember it in your adult life. And depending on how deeply it affected you, your personality might be based upon that. So having a lot of time during the pandemic really helped me to process and focus in on those raw emotions that I really didn't process when I was in my childhood. Even though I'm no longer a child, my brain still wants to problem solve and fix the problems of the past. And I would always try to think of how optimally I would do things now with my knowledge, so that I could prevent my younger self from going through the same anguish and memories that I had. These are the lessons learned that I would tell my younger self if I had the opportunity to do so. It's my greatest regret, and certainly it's not my fault, to not have someone to help me through that challenging childhood. Because that person or guide could have helped me through some rough times and given me some context into what I was going through. And ideally that person would have similar background to me, being a second generation Asian American. Because specifically a lot of the issues was born from cultural clashes, Chinese and American. And lastly, this video is really for me to process through my emotion, but also for those who feel the same way as I do growing up, feeling cathartic about it all. So now let's go through some of my lessons learned about my Asian childhood. Number 1, write down more stuff. I really wish that I kept more notes and journals about what happened in my childhood, and that I kept it so that my adult self can review and go over those things. A physical or an electronic journal would help me so much in my present day situation to figure out what I went through as a child. Really something to document my thoughts, feelings, and accomplishments during those times. My memory is fairly good, but there's no way I can remember everything about my childhood, and some of it is just lost to time. Every time I make a new memory, something old gets pushed out of the way to make room for that. I would say most of my childhood memories have been lost to the passage of time. Good, bad, or indifferent, they all kind of went away. So now as an adult, the only things I can really remember with any clarity are strong emotional events. So one of my advice to my younger self is to document as much as I can about what I'm going through during those times. This allows yourself in the future to really reflect and learn from the mistakes of the past. I want to remember my childhood and all those things contributing to my childhood. Number 2, discover the arts. I think I missed a significant calling in my life in not participating in the creative arts more. One of my earliest memories was being in a theater arts production in first grade. It was one of my most favorite memories of that time. I really loved acting and being in the center of attention. Other things really got in the way, like the core subjects of math, science, and English. And I didn't really have time to explore the creative aspects of myself in music, theater, or arts. And I would have to also say that my parents really didn't push me in the creative arts section at all. They didn't really introduce me to those creative fields. So I really didn't know whether to pursue them at all. I was really kind of pushed into the math and science fields. And it really wasn't until I was much older in my last year of high school that I started to pursue more creative topics. I took theater as an elective on a whim, and I absolutely loved my experience during that time. I learned so much about myself because of what I missed from my childhood. I got so wrapped up in schoolwork and applying to colleges that I just didn't have time for anything else. And I was working so hard to get into a good school rather than pursuing my passions at the time. What I would have told my younger self is to pursue more of a balanced life. Pursue academics, but also have time for creative arts as well. Because as much time as I spent on science, math, and English, I also did have time to pursue creative activities as well. I just didn't do it. And number 3, get into a sport. So just like the last lessons learned, I would tell my younger self to pursue sports as well. Sports is something that I really just didn't get into. Because looking back on it now, I would have developed crucial skill sets that I wouldn't otherwise get if I didn't have a sport. Because there's a lot of things you can learn about winning, losing, being a good sportsmanship, and also working as a team. I was a very sore loser as a child, and I didn't really understand how to win or lose properly. And I really didn't understand how to lose gracefully until college, so I made my friendships suffer. Sports would have also helped me with my hand-eye coordination and strengthening of my body as a child. Because as a child I was undersized and I really didn't catch up until later in life. And it was really hard during my childhood because I was compared to the other athletes. So if I were to go back in time and talk to myself, I would tell him to pursue cross-country, basketball, or badminton. And try to get myself involved in team sports as much as possible, even if I didn't like the sport itself. Because I do feel like I missed a big portion of my life that could have been dedicated to being part of a team as a child. And being part of a team would gain me extra skill sets that I wouldn't otherwise get if I was just doing things by myself. Number 4, friendships are temporary. This one's tough for my younger self to hear, but friendships don't last as long as we think it does when we're a child. Because as a child, you're always growing, and people always grow differently and at different rates. So when you become an adult, you might not have the same friend as you did as a child. And if you do have that childhood friend, other things might get in the way. You might move out of state or out of town. For example, I moved in between elementary and middle school, so I lost all of my elementary school friends. And losing friendships kept happening to me as I grew and moved on from one thing to the next. If I had stayed in one place, I might have avoided this, but unfortunately I did move and it broke lots of connections early in my childhood. It was an early lessons learned to me about the true nature of friendships. Sometimes through no fault of your own, you'll lose many friends throughout your life. Part of the reason why I had a rougher childhood was that I had to continuously make new friends as I moved from place to place. This lack of continuity really made it hard for me to form long-standing bonds. So I would say to my younger self that it's normal to gain and lose friends over time. You're not going to have the same group of friends that you did throughout your life. But it's worth it to meet as many people along the way because you don't know what gems you'll find out there. And the good friendships that you find later on in life will last you the lifetime. And number 5, parents aren't perfect. Man, this is a big one. If I could tell my younger self anything, it would be my parents aren't perfect. Because for the longest time, I thought my parents were perfect and I had to model myself based on my parents. This apparent perfection that I thought my parents had really broke down when I visited my friends' houses. I would see that my friends' families have completely different styles of parenting. And I was shocked by how lax and happy their family was in relations to mine. From the more dominant style Asian parenting to the more permissive style American parenting. My non-Asian friends just were more happy and had more freedoms. And one of the other bigger issues that I had was it was hard to convince my parents that we were living in a different culture than ones that they grew up in. Being raised in the 90s in America is far different than the 60s in China. But that wouldn't stop them from giving me advice that they used in the 60s as a child in China versus in America. And let me tell you, some of those advice that they gave me were straight up bad or wrong. As a child, I would take their advice not knowing that it came from a different culture and time, and most of the time, when I took their advice, I would end up suffering as a result. I could probably go into more depth about this particular issue, but I'm going to save it for another video. But in general, I would tell my younger self that my parents aren't perfect and that they make mistakes as well. And also be critical of the advice from people who don't have relevant experience in that domain. So for example, advice given on 1960s China will be different than 1990s America. Lacking in relevant childhood experience, I would trust my child gut more. So here are my thoughts on the lessons learned. As I get more comfortable talking about my past, I'll get into more detail and be able to process it more. It's hard to talk about my past non-objectively. There's always going to be some bias that I bring to it. And through this process, I'm definitely aware of the biases that I have when talking about my experiences. And part of the process of me talking about it is to get deeper into it and uncover those unconscious biases that I have. And underlying this video is the fact that it's really helpful to have someone guide you through childhood. Ideally, this is your parents, but it could be some trusted friend as well. As long as you could trust them with giving you correct and accurate information, that's all it really matters. I really didn't have that trusted confidant that I could ask things about. When I asked my parents about certain situations, they would either ignore the answer or give me false information. This was not good because either I had false information or I had to figure it out by myself. So having a key trusted adult, in my opinion, is a really good way to help you through a rough childhood. That person ideally would understand the culture and the context in which that child is growing up in. So those are my lessons learned about my childhood that I wish I'd known about earlier. Knowing that your life could have been changed had you done a couple of things differently isn't pleasant. As much as I think about the could've, would've, should've, I like to take action on things. I can't just go back in time and tell my younger self all of the lessons I've learned, but I can help someone else. So you might also be able to help guide someone on that better path in life. So take the lessons I've learned and don't repeat the mistakes of my childhood. So thank you for watching. Please leave me a comment down below on how you survived your childhood and what would you do differently. And I'll see you next time.